The first thing I noticed when I walked through my front door was the silence. No video game sounds from Darnell's room, no pop music from Jennifer's, just the hollow echo of my footsteps and the faint sound of giggling. I'm Hannah, and I just spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from major surgery. All I wanted was to hug my kids and sleep in my own bed. Instead, I found my sister-in-law Tatum, perched on my living room couch like she owned the place, scrolling through her phone with a smirk on her face. "Where are the kids?" I asked, my stomach already nodding. Something felt wrong. Tatum looked up, her perfectly manicured fingers still tapping away at her screen. "Oh, Hannah, you're home earlier than expected. How are you feeling?" "Where are my children, Tatum?" She waved her hand dismissively. "They're fine, safe and sound at Wellington Academy. It's the best boarding school in the state." The room started spinning. "Boarding school? What are you talking about?" "Well, someone had to step up while you were indisposed," she said, emphasizing the last word, like my surgery had been an inconvenience to her. Clifford agreed it was for the best. "Clifford," my voice cracked. "My husband agreed to send our children away without even telling me. He knows I have their best interest at heart. Always have." She stood up, smoothing her designer dress. "The local schools here are so inadequate. Wellington will give them the advantages they deserve." I grabbed my phone, hands shaking as I dialed Clifford's number. He answered on the third ring. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, before he could even say hello. "Hannah, honey, I was going to explain when you got home," he said, his voice maddeningly calm. "Tatum found this amazing opportunity." "Amazing opportunity? They're our children, Clifford, not some business deal." "Keep your voice down," Tatum interrupted, placing her hand on my arm. I jerked away from her touch. "The doctors said you need to avoid stress. Don't you dare pretend to care about my health," I spat. "You waited until I was literally on an operating table to steal my children." "Steal?" Tatum laughed, that irritating giggle again. "Don't be so dramatic. I've done you a favor. Now you can focus on your recovery without worrying about the kids." Clifford's voice came through the phone. "Hannah, please. Tatum's right. You need to rest." "I need my children," I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "How far away is this school? When can I see them?" Tatum's smile turned predatory. "Wellington has a strict adjustment period. No parental contact for the first month. It helps them settle in." The room went silent, except for the sound of blood rushing in my ears. "A month? They expected me to go a month without seeing my babies." "Get out," I whispered. "Excuse me?" Tatum's eyes widened in mock offense. "Get out of my house." She gathered her designer purse, shaking her head like I was being unreasonable. "I'll give you time to process this. You'll thank me later, Hannah. You always do." As soon as she left, I collapsed onto the couch, still clutching my phone. Clifford was saying something, but I couldn't focus on his words. My eyes landed on a family photo on the wall, Jennifer's 13th birthday, just 3 months ago. Darnell was making bunny ears behind his sister's head, and we were all laughing. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Georgia. "Heard you're home. Want me to bring dinner over?" I typed back quickly. "Come now, please. Emergency." 20 minutes later, Georgia found me still on the couch, surrounded by printouts of Wellington Academy's website that I'd managed to find and print. "They took my kids," I said, my voice hollow. "Tatum convinced Clifford to send them away while I was under anesthesia." Georgia's face darkened. "That snake, she's been trying to control your family for years. But this is a new low." I looked up at my friend, something shifting inside me. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, clear anger. "She thinks she's won, that I'm too weak right now to fight back. And are you?" I picked up the Wellington Academy brochure, noticing for the first time the list of board members and investors at the back. A familiar name caught my eye, and suddenly I remembered something important, something Tatum didn't know about. "No," I said, a plan already forming in my mind. "I'm not weak at all. And Tatum just made the biggest mistake of her life." "You own what?" Georgia nearly spilled her coffee across my kitchen table. 15% of Wellington Academy, I said, spreading out the investment documents I'd dug up from my home office, and 12% of their sister school, Thornfield Prep. It was part of my grandmother's estate. I never paid much attention because the quarterly reports always looked fine. Georgia leaned forward, her eyes scanning the papers. Does Tatum know about this? No. The investments are under my maiden name. I took a sip of my own coffee, grimacing at the cold liquid. But that's not all. Look at this. I pulled up my laptop, showing her the email I'd received from the school's financial director just minutes ago. Apparently, there's a major stakeholder meeting next week. Something about policy changes and budget approvals. Perfect timing, Georgia said, then hesitated. But Hannah, are you sure you're strong enough for this? You just had surgery. I'm stronger than Tatum thinks. I stood up, ignoring the slight pull of stitches. Besides, I've got more motivation than she could ever imagine. My phone buzzed. Clifford again. I'd been avoiding his calls since yesterday. You should talk to him, Georgia advised. He needs to understand what his sister really is. I answered the phone, putting it on speaker. Yes? Hannah, please. Clifford's voice cracked slightly. Can we talk about this? I'm coming home early. Good, there's something you need to see. 30 minutes later, Clifford walked in, looking tired and guilty. Before he could speak, I handed him a stack of papers. What's this? He asked. Bank statements, family trust documents, emails. I watched his face as he started reading. Your sister has been systematically isolating and manipulating this family for years. His brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Remember when she convinced you to miss Jennifer's piano recital for that emergency business meeting? There was no meeting. Remember when she told us Darnell's baseball coach had concerns about his behavior? I called the coach yesterday. He never said anything of the sort. Clifford sank into a chair. That doesn't mean... Keep reading, Georgia interrupted. Show him the trust fund papers, Hannah. I pulled out the relevant documents. She's been siphoning money from the children's trust funds to pay for this boarding school. Funds that, by the way, she shouldn't even have access to. That's impossible, Clifford protested, but his voice wavered. Tatum would never... The doorbell rang. Georgia peeked through the window and groaned. Speak of the devil. Tatum breezed in without waiting for an invitation, Knox trailing behind her. Family meeting. I brought lunch. Oh. She stopped short, seeing all of us gathered around the papers. What's going on? Just reviewing some interesting financial documents, I said coolly. Care to explain why your signature is on my children's trust fund withdrawals? Tatum's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. As their aunt and a financial advisor, I'm simply managing their assets responsibly. You mean stealing from them? Georgia muttered. Excuse me? Knox stepped forward. My wife doesn't steal. She's trying to help your children get the best education possible. I turned to him. Knox, when was the last time you checked your own accounts? Really checked them? A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Tatum shot me a warning look. You're just upset because you're not in control right now, she said smoothly. The medication must be making you paranoid. Clifford, maybe we should consider... Consider what? I cut in. Having me declared incompetent? Is that your next move? The room went silent. Clifford looked between his sister and me, confusion and doubt warring on his face. I would never, Tatum gasped, but her hand tightened on her purse strap. I love this family. Everything I do is for this family. No, I said, standing up straight despite the pain in my abdomen. Everything you do is for yourself. But you made one crucial mistake, Tatum. Oh? Her lips curved in that condescending smile I'd grown to hate. And what's that? You sent my children to Wellington Academy without checking who owns it. I pulled out my investment portfolio. Would you like to know who has the power to change school policies, including their ridiculous no-contact rule? For the first time since I'd known her, Tatum's perfect mask cracked. She snatched the papers from my hands, her face paling as she read. This is, she started. Just the beginning, I finished for her. Now, would you like to tell everyone what you've really been up to, or should I? My phone lit up with an unknown number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Mom, Jennifer's whispered voice made my heart skip. Jenny, baby, are you okay? I'm hiding in the bathroom. We're not supposed to have phones, but Sarah let me borrow hers. Her voice cracked. Mom, I hate it here. They took Darnell to a different campus. I haven't seen him in days. I gripped the phone tighter. They separated you. Tatum said it was better this way. Something about different programs, for different needs. Jennifer sniffled. Dad won't answer my emails. Are you sick? They told us you were too sick to take care of us. I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm coming to get you both, I promise. I checked my watch. I have a meeting with the school board tomorrow. Mrs. Harrison is really strict, Mom. She says we can't leave until... A sharp knock interrupted her. I have to go. The line went dead. I immediately called Georgia. They separated my children. Different campuses. That's not in any of the enrollment paperwork, she said. I've been going through everything you sent over. Meet me at the coffee shop near Wellington. I need to do some reconnaissance before tomorrow's board meeting. An hour later, Georgia and I sat at a corner table, watching the steady stream of Wellington Academy parents and staff members coming in for their morning coffee. That's Mrs. Harrison, Georgia whispered, nodding toward a stern-looking woman in a tailored suit. The headmistress Jennifer mentioned. I stood up, smoothing my blazer. Perfect timing. Mrs. Harrison. I approached her table. I'm Hannah, one of the school's investors. I was hoping we could chat. Her eyes narrowed slightly. I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled. We don't. But given tomorrow's board meeting, I thought it might be helpful to discuss some concerns privately first. I sat down without waiting for an invitation, particularly about the new split campus policy. Ah, yes, Mrs. Phillips assured us the board was fully informed. Mrs. Phillips? I interrupted. Tatum Phillips. In what capacity does she speak for the board? Mrs. Harrison frowned. As the liaison for family enrollment and policy implementation, she's been quite insistent about certain changes. I see. I pulled out my phone, showing her my investment documentation. As a major stakeholder, I find it concerning that these decisions were made without proper board approval. The color drained from her face. I was led to believe, that is, Mrs. Phillips said. I'm sure she did. Tell me, how many other families have been affected by this split campus policy? 3, including the Bennett children. She swallowed hard. Mrs. Phillips said it was a pilot program. And the no-contact policy. That was also her recommendation. She said it was standard practice at elite institutions. My phone buzzed with a text from Georgia. Knox just walked in. I looked up to see Tatum's husband ordering coffee, his shoulders tense. He'd been unusually quiet during yesterday's confrontation. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Harrison, I said, standing. I look forward to discussing these policies further at tomorrow's meeting. I intercepted Knox at the counter. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, he muttered. But his hands shook as he reached for his coffee. Really, because I have plenty to say about the money Tatum's been moving through your joint accounts. He froze. What are you talking about? I led him to a quiet corner. $300,000, Knox. That's how much she's transferred from various family accounts in the past year alone. Did you really think those home renovation costs were legitimate? She said it was for the children's future. His voice was barely audible. Private tutors, educational consultants. Check your accounts, really check them. And ask yourself why she needed to separate my children and cut off all contact with their parents. Knox's face crumpled. She wouldn't. She couldn't. She did. And tomorrow, everyone's going to know exactly what she's been doing. I handed him a copy of the financial records. The question is, are you going to keep enabling her, or are you going to help me protect these children? He stared at the papers for a long moment. The board meeting. What time? 9 a.m. Don't tell Tatum you're coming. As I walked back to Georgia's table, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Mom? This time it was Darnell's voice, thick with tears. Can you come get me, please? Soon, baby, I promised, my resolve strengthening. Very soon. Just hold on one more day. I looked at Georgia, who was already gathering her things. Time to finish this, she said. Yes, I agreed. Time to bring my children home. The Wellington Academy boardroom felt colder than it should have. I adjusted my blazer, trying to ignore the surgical pain, as I took my seat at the long mahogany table. Georgia squeezed my hand under the table. You've got this, she whispered. Board members filed in one by one, their curious glances darting between me and the thick folders in front of each seat. Mrs. Harrison sat rigidly at the far end, her face pale. Knox slipped in just before 9, choosing a seat near the door. Then Tatum walked in, her usual confident smile faltering when she saw me. What are you doing here? She hissed, dropping her designer bag on the table. Attending a board meeting, as is my right as a major stakeholder. You're not well enough to— Let's begin, announced Mr. Peterson, the board chairman. First item, the recent policy changes regarding campus separation and parent communication restrictions. Tatum smoothly interrupted. As I've explained in previous meetings, these changes are essential for— Actually, I stood up, ignoring the pull of stitches. I'd like to address these policies first, specifically how they were implemented without proper board approval. That's ridiculous, Tatum scoffed. Everything was properly documented. Was it? I opened the folders in front of each board member because these financial records show something very different. The room filled with the sound of rustling papers and sharp intakes of breath. Tatum's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table. Mrs. Harrison, I turned to the headmistress. Would you please share what you told me yesterday about Mrs. Phillips's role in these changes? Mrs. Harrison cleared her throat. Mrs. Phillips presented herself as the board's official liaison. She insisted the policies had full approval, which they didn't, Mr. Peterson confirmed, frowning at the documents. These signatures, they're not legitimate. Of course they are. Tatum stood up, her voice rising. Everything I've done is for the good of these children. Hannah is clearly unstable. Is that why you forged my signature on these withdrawal forms? Knox's quiet voice cut through her protests. He pulled out more papers from his briefcase. I checked our accounts last night, Tatum. All of them. The color drained from Tatum's face. Knox, darling, I can explain. Explain what? I pressed. How you've been systematically isolating children from their families. How you've been embezzling from their trust funds. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Peterson said gravely. With serious evidence. I nodded to Georgia, who started passing out another set of documents. Bank records, forged signatures, falsified board approvals, and statements from other families who've been similarly targeted. The boardroom door opened again. Clifford walked in, followed by 2 police officers. No, Tatum whispered, her perfect facade cracking. Clifford, you can't. I already did, my husband said quietly. I filed the police report this morning. Officers, Mr. Peterson stood. I believe we have some matters to discuss regarding fraudulent financial activities. Tatum's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. You don't understand. Hannah was neglecting those children. Someone had to step in. By stealing from them, Knox's voice shook. By separating siblings and cutting them off from their parents. I was protecting them. No, I said firmly. You were controlling them, like you've tried to control everyone around you. But it's over now. The officers stepped forward. Mrs. Phillips, we need you to come with us. This isn't happening. She laughed hysterically. You'll regret this, Hannah. All of you will regret this. As the officers let her out, her threats echoing down the hallway, Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. I believe we need to take an emergency vote on reversing these unauthorized policies. He looked around the room. All in favor? Every hand went up. Motion passed. Mrs. Harrison, please make arrangements for the Bennett children to be reunited immediately. I sagged in relief, feeling Georgia's supportive arm around my shoulders. Clifford approached slowly, his eyes red-rimmed. Hannah, I'm so sorry. I should have seen. Later, I cut him off. Right now, I need to get our children. Knox stood up, keys in hand. I'll drive you. It's the least I can do. As we left the boardroom, Mr. Peterson called out, Hannah, there's something else you should know. We found similar patterns at other schools, other families. This goes deeper than we thought. I turned back, steel in my voice. Then we'll help them too. But first, I'm bringing my babies home. Georgia squeezed my hand one last time. Go get them. I'll start making calls. Those other families deserve to know the truth too. Walking out of Wellington Academy, I felt stronger than I had in weeks. The surgery scar pulled with each step, but it didn't matter. I was finally going to see my children. And Tatum, she was about to learn that karma has perfect aim. Mom, Jennifer's voice echoed across the Wellington Academy courtyard as she ran toward me, her uniform skirt flying behind her. I caught her in my arms, ignoring the sharp pain in my abdomen. I knew you'd come, she sobbed into my shoulder. I knew you weren't too sick. Knox shifted uncomfortably beside us. I'll go get the car ready for Thornfield. That's where Darnell is. How could she do this? Jennifer pulled back, wiping her eyes. Aunt Tatum told us you were in a mental hospital, that you couldn't take care of us anymore. My blood ran cold. She what? She said we had to keep it a secret from everyone, Jennifer continued. She made us write these weird letters, saying we wanted to stay here, said if we didn't, they'd take us away from you forever. Clifford, who had been silent until now, made a choked sound. Jenny, I'm so sorry. I should have questioned her more. Dad, Jennifer's voice was small. Why did you let her send us away? Before he could answer, Mrs. Harrison approached, with Jennifer's belongings. Everything's packed, and there's something else you should see. She handed me a file. Letters Tatum made all the separated children write. She was building a case for custodial interference. Building a case? Clifford took the file, his hands shaking. Against who? Against me, I said, scanning the documents. These letters paint me as an unfit mother. She was going to use them to take the kids permanently. Knox returned, car keys jingling nervously. We should get to Thornfield before they break for lunch. Darnell's waiting. The drive to Thornfield Prep was tense. Jennifer sat pressed against me in the back seat, as if afraid I'd disappear. Clifford kept trying to catch my eye in the rearview mirror, but I focused on the passing scenery instead. Thornfield was smaller than Wellington, but just as imposing. Darnell was already waiting at the front steps with his duffel bag, his face lighting up when he saw us. Mom, he crashed into me with the force of a small tornado. Did you get my message? I borrowed Tommy's phone and I got it, baby. I held him tight, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. I'm here now. Mrs. Bennett, a tall man in a suit, approached. I'm Dr. Roberts, the headmaster. There are some concerning incidents we need to discuss regarding Darnell's behavior. What incidents? I asked, keeping my arm around my son. He's been resistant to our program, refusing to participate in mandatory counseling sessions about his family situation. Counseling sessions? Knox interrupted. What counseling sessions? Dr. Roberts consulted his tablet. Mrs. Phillips arranged them. She said the children needed help processing their mother's instability. The only unstable person here is Tatum, I said firmly, and she's currently in police custody for fraud and embezzlement. The headmaster's face paled. I had no idea. She seemed so concerned about the children's welfare. She was concerned about control, Knox said quietly. She's always been obsessed with controlling everyone around her. Jennifer tugged at my sleeve. Can we go home now, please? Yes, I said, gathering both my children close. We're going home. As we walked to the car, Dr. Roberts called out, there will be an investigation into all of this. Other families will need to be notified. I know, I replied, and we'll help them. But right now, my children need to be home. The drive back was filled with Darnell and Jennifer's chatter as they caught up on their forced separation. In the front seat, Clifford gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Hannah, he started, I don't know how to make this right. Not now, I said quietly. We'll talk later. Knox cleared his throat. I should get to the police station. They'll need my statement about the financial records. Mom, Darnell asked from beside me. Is Aunt Tatum going to jail? Probably, I answered honestly. She hurt a lot of people. Good, Jennifer said fiercely. She deserves it. My phone buzzed with a text from Georgia. More families coming forward. 5 so far, all with similar stories. You started something big here. I looked at my children, safe beside me, then at Clifford's guilty profile in the driver's seat, and finally at Knox's devastated expression. Tatum's actions had rippled out, affecting so many lives, but now the truth was coming to light. When we get home, I said, we're ordering pizza and watching movies all day. No homework, no phones, no interruptions. Can we build a blanket fort? Darnell asked hopefully. The biggest one ever, I promised, holding them close. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone. Sometimes it's about rebuilding what they tried to break. 7 families, Georgia announced, spreading files across my dining room table, all with the same pattern. Tatum would target families during medical emergencies or personal crises, then swoop in as the caring relative. And the money? Knox asked from his corner of the table. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Siphoned through a network of fake educational consulting companies, Georgia replied. Your signature is on most of the paperwork, Knox. He put his head in his hands. I never read the documents she gave me. I just trusted her. The doorbell rang. Jennifer peeked out from the blanket fort in the living room, where she and Darnell were watching movies. Is that the police again? No, sweetie, it's probably the other families. I opened the door to find 3 couples standing there, looking uncertain. I'm Sarah's mom, one woman said. From Wellington, Georgia called us. Come in, I gestured them inside. We have a lot to discuss. As they settled around the table, their stories poured out. Each one was painfully familiar. Medical emergencies, family crises, Tatum, appearing with promises of help and solutions. She told us our daughter needed special counseling. Sarah's father said that the separation from her brother was therapeutic. She convinced my husband I was too depressed to make decisions about our sons. Another mother added tearfully, I only had postpartum anxiety, but she made it sound like I was dangerous. Knox stood up abruptly. I need to show you something. He pulled out his laptop, opening financial records. These are the real numbers, what she did with your money. The room fell silent as they looked at the screen. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, moved through shell companies and fake educational programs. Why? Sarah's mother whispered. Why would she do this? Power, Clifford said from the doorway. I hadn't heard him come in. My sister. She's always needed to control everything, everyone. Dad, Darnell called out. Come see our fort. Clifford hesitated, looking at me. I nodded slightly, and he disappeared into the living room. The detective called, Georgia said, checking her phone. Tatum's being charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and custodial interference. They're executing a search warrant on her home office right now. Knox's phone buzzed. His face went ash white as he read the message. They found more files, detailed plans for taking permanent custody of Jennifer and Darnell. She had fake psychological evaluations, forged court documents, everything. My stomach lurched. She was never going to let them come home. Mom? Jennifer appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. Is Aunt Tatum going to try to take us away again? No, baby. I held out my arms, and she came to me. She can't hurt us anymore. The police want statements from all the children, Georgia said gently. But they'll do it with child psychologists present. Make it as easy as possible. Sarah's father stood up. We should form a support group. For the families and the kids, they need to know they're not alone. I can help with that, Knox offered quietly. It's the least I can do, considering you were a victim too, I reminded him. She manipulated everyone. The doorbell rang again. This time it was the detective, holding a stack of papers. We found something else, she said, laying out documents. Evidence of similar schemes in 3 other states. Different names, same pattern. This goes back years. The other parents gathered around, recognizing names and dates. Stories of other families, other children, separated and manipulated. What do you need from us? I asked. Statements, testimony, evidence of financial fraud. The detective looked around the room. The more families that come forward, the stronger the case. We'll help, Sarah's mother said firmly. All of us will. From the living room, I heard Darnell laugh at something Clifford said. The sound of my son's happiness, so recently restored, strengthened my resolve. There's one more thing, Knox said. The school board meeting tomorrow. They're voting on new policies to prevent this from ever happening again. We'll be there, I promised, all of us. As the other families began sharing contact information and making plans, I watched Jennifer rejoin her brother in their blanket fort. Clifford caught my eye, his face full of remorse and hope. Hannah, he started. Later, I said. Right now, our children need us both. My phone buzzed with another text from the detective. Tatum's asking to make a deal. Says she has information about other cases. I looked at the families around my dining room table, all brought together by one woman's manipulation. Then at my children, safe in their fortress of blankets and pillows. Tell her no deal, I texted back. We're taking this all the way. Sometimes justice needs to be complete to truly heal the wounds left behind. The courthouse hallway buzzed with nervous energy. Families huddled together in small groups, children clutching their parents' hands. Georgia sat beside me, reviewing our testimony one last time. Are you ready? She asked. Before I could answer, the courtroom doors opened. Tatum walked in, escorted by officers, her designer outfit replaced by standard jail attire. Her eyes locked with mine, and for a moment, I saw something I'd never seen before: fear. All rise, the bailiff called. The preliminary hearing began with the prosecution laying out their case. Evidence mounted as family after family testified about Tatum's manipulation and fraud. She told me my wife was mentally unstable. One father testified, convinced me to sign papers I never read. By the time I realized what was happening, my children were already separated and enrolled in different schools. Knox took the stand next, his voice shaking. I trusted her completely. She handled all our finances, all our decisions. When she said these families needed help, I believed her. Tatum's lawyer tried to paint her as a concerned aunt and community member who maybe went too far trying to help. But then came the financial evidence. Bank records show systematic theft exceeding $2 million. The forensic accountant testified. Multiple shell companies, fake educational programs, and forged documents spanning 5 years and 3 states. When it was my turn to testify, I felt Tatum's eyes boring into me. Mrs. Bennett, the prosecutor began, please tell us about the day you returned from surgery. I described finding my children gone, the manipulation, the lies. As I spoke, Jennifer squeezed Darnell's hand in the gallery. And what did you discover about Mrs. Phillips's long-term plans? She was building a case to take permanent custody of my children, I said clearly. She had forged psychological evaluations, claiming I was an unfit mother. Objection, Tatum's lawyer stood. Speculation. Overruled, the judge responded. Continue. I held up the documents Knox had found. These papers show she planned to file for emergency custody while I was still recovering from surgery. She forced my children to write letters, claiming they were afraid of me. That's not true, Tatum suddenly shouted, jumping up. I was protecting them. Hannah was weak, distracted. Those children needed structure, guidance. Mrs. Phillips, control yourself, the judge warned. You don't understand, Tatum continued, her perfect facade crumbling. I did what no one else would do. Those families were falling apart. I fixed them. By stealing their money, Knox called from his seat. By traumatizing children. Order. The judge banged his gavel. Mrs. Phillips, one more outburst, and you'll be removed. The prosecution presented their final piece of evidence, a recording from Jennifer's phone. Tatum's voice filled the courtroom. "Your mother's sick, Jenny, mentally sick. If you don't write this letter saying you're scared of her, they'll put you in foster care. Is that what you want?" Jennifer's small voice replied, "But I'm not scared of Mom. You're lying. Do it." Tatum's voice turned harsh, "Or you'll never see your brother again." The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Parents pulled their children closer. Tatum sat rigid in her chair, her face ashen. "Your Honor," the prosecutor stood, "given the overwhelming evidence of fraud, emotional abuse, and attempted custodial interference, we ask that the defendant be held without bail pending trial." "Your Honor, my client," Tatum's lawyer started, "has shown a pattern of manipulation and control that makes her a threat to these families." The judge interrupted. "Bail denied. This case will proceed to trial." As officers led Tatum away, she turned to me one last time. "I was right about you, Hannah. You're weak. You always were." "No, Tatum," I replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm strong enough to protect my children from you. We all are." Outside the courthouse, the families gathered together. Sarah's mother organized a support group meeting for the following week. Knox promised to help track down more of Tatum's victims in other states. "Mom?" Jennifer tugged at my sleeve. "Can we go home now?" "Actually," Clifford stepped forward, "I was thinking maybe we could get ice cream first, as a family." The kids looked at me hopefully. Despite everything, they still wanted their father in their lives. "Ice cream sounds perfect," I said. As we walked to the car, Georgia caught my arm. "The detective called. They found more evidence at Tatum's house. This could turn into a federal case." I watched my children climbing into the back seat, together and safe. Clifford held the door open, his eyes asking for forgiveness and a chance to rebuild. "Whatever happens next," I said, "we'll face it together, all of us." Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in destroying your enemy, but in rebuilding what they tried to break. And sometimes, family means giving second chances to those who deserve them. Guilty on all counts. The judge's words echoed through the packed courtroom. Tatum stood motionless as the sentences were read out. 15 years for fraud, additional time for custodial interference, consecutive sentences totaling 23 years. I felt Jennifer squeeze my hand as Tatum was led away. This time, she didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, Knox approached our family group. "The restitution papers are signed. Every family will get their money back, plus interest." "It's not about the money," Sarah's mother said, hugging her daughter close. "It's about healing." Speaking of healing, Georgia called out, waving a stack of papers. "The support group numbers are growing. 3 more families came forward this morning." Darnell tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, can we show them now?" I nodded, and he pulled out his tablet. We made something, all us kids together. The gathered families crowded around as Darnell pressed play. On screen, children appeared one by one, all those who had been separated and manipulated by Tatum. Each spoke directly to the camera. "My name is Jennifer, and I am not afraid. I'm Darnell, and I know my mom loves me. I'm Sarah, and it wasn't my fault." One by one, they reclaimed their voices, their truth. Parents wiped away tears as their children's faces appeared, strong and resilient. "It was Jenny's idea," Clifford said softly beside me. "She said everyone needed to hear their own voice again." The video ended with all the children together, saying in unison, "We are not victims, we are survivors." "This is going viral," Knox said, checking his phone. "Other families are reaching out, not just about Tatum, about other cases, other manipulators." "Then we'll help them too," I said. "That's why we started the foundation." Georgia grinned. "Speaking of which, the first grant applications are in. 5 families seeking legal help to fight similar cases. We'll review them tomorrow," Sarah's father said, after the celebration. "Celebration?" Darnell perked up. "Ice cream," Jennifer announced. "Dad rented out the whole shop, everyone's invited. As families began moving toward their cars, Knox held back. Hannah, there's something else you should know. The federal investigation found evidence of Tatum's schemes going back to college. She did this to me first, isolated me from my family, controlled everything. Knox, I touched his arm gently. You're free now. We all are. At the ice cream shop, children darted between tables, sharing stories and swapping flavors. Parents who had once been strangers now sat together, planning support meetings and foundation events. Clifford brought me a bowl of mint chocolate chip. He still remembered my favorite. The house feels whole again, he said quietly. With all of us there, I know I don't deserve. Stop, I interrupted. We're not talking about deserve anymore. We're talking about choose. Every day we choose to heal, to trust again, to be better. Mom, Darnell called out. Sarah's dad says we can use their lake house for the next kids' retreat. Perfect, I smiled. As long as there's no lake swimming until you finish your lessons. I can teach them, Clifford offered, like I taught Jennifer. Our daughter appeared beside us, ice cream cone in hand. Really, Dad, you'll come to the retreat. If you want me to, he said carefully. Jennifer considered this, then nodded. Yeah, I do. My phone buzzed. Another message from the detective. 2 more states opening investigations. You started something big here. Looking around the ice cream shop, I saw what we'd really started. Healing. Children laughing together. Parents sharing resources and support. Families rebuilding. Knox was organizing a father's support group. Georgia was helping Sarah's mother design a website for the foundation. Even Mrs. Harrison from Wellington had come, bringing news that the school's new family protection policies were being adopted across the state. Mom? Jennifer and Darnell sandwiched me in a hug. Can we get another scoop? Sure, I laughed. But remember, we're having family game night later. With Dad? Darnell asked. I met Clifford's hopeful gaze. With Dad? As my children raced back to the ice cream counter, I thought about Tatum's last words to me about being weak. She never understood that real strength isn't about control. It's about love, healing, and the courage to rebuild. Ready to head home? Clifford asked. Home. Not just a place, but a feeling. A choice we make every day. Yes, I said. Let's go home. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting better. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply finding your way back to love.
The morning sunlight streaming through my home office window gently reflected off my monitor screen. The early summer morning in the quiet residential area of suburban Charlotte was more peaceful than usual. As a freelance graphic designer, being able to work from home was my greatest happiness. Mom, I did it. My 6-year-old son Tommy burst into my office with a backpack in his hands, beaming with pride. We had a family trip to Atlanta planned for the weekend. Though it was just a journey to attend my aunt's 80th birthday party, for Tommy, it felt like a long-awaited adventure. That's wonderful, Tommy. Did you remember to pack your toothbrush? Yes. I packed everything from the list Dad helped me make. I couldn't help but smile at Tommy's words. My husband Michael, despite being vice president of Skyline Development, was a wonderful father who never neglected his family. Last night's scene of him making a packing list with Tommy was particularly memorable. Good morning, you two. Michael's voice called from downstairs, and soon he appeared at my office door. His well-fitted navy suit reflected his characteristic attention to detail, even on a weekend morning. I'm heading to the office early to prepare for tomorrow's vacation. Jessica will help me organize the paperwork, so I should be back by evening. I nodded at Michael's words. Jessica was his capable subordinate who had earned his trust since joining the company. She was someone we could rely on to handle work matters during our vacation. Then we'll take care of things here at home. Tommy said he'd help too. Is that right? Tommy, take good care of Mom, okay? Michael gently patted Tommy's head, and our son beamed with pride. Tommy, now a first grader at Providence Spring Elementary, was growing more mature by the day. He was known for his bright and honest personality at school, and his teachers spoke highly of him. He particularly excelled in math and science, saying he wanted to become an architect like Dad when he grew up. Oh, that reminds me, I said. We're still leaving at 8 a.m. tomorrow, right? It takes about 5 hours to Atlanta, so even with breaks, we'll have plenty of time to make it to the party. Yes, that's right. It should be a comfortable trip in the new SUV, Michael replied with satisfaction. After he left, I continued preparing for the trip with Tommy. Though it was disappointing to miss Sunday church, I was sure God would understand our prioritizing this important family event. Through the window, I could see our neighbor watering her garden flowers. This peaceful daily life was our happiness itself. At 8 a.m. Saturday morning, we left home as planned. While Michael checked the navigation app in the driver's seat of our new Ford Explorer, I took my time checking Tommy's safety in the back seat. With typical maternal meticulousness, I checked everything from the child's seatbelt tightness to his seating comfort and leg position. It's a long drive to Atlanta, but let's make it a fun trip. Let me know if you get bored. You brought your favorite dinosaur book, right? Yes. And the game Dad bought me yesterday. Tommy's energetic response reassured me as I settled back into the passenger seat. The car was filled with that new car smell, and the plush beige leather seats embraced us comfortably. This new car Michael had chosen was indeed perfect for family trips. The spacious interior, latest safety features, and quiet engine, everything seemed perfect. Michael pointed at the screen and said, "We should make it in plenty of time even with a couple of breaks." Though the forecast predicted humid weather, the air-conditioned interior was perfectly comfortable. As we headed south on I-85, Michael would occasionally speak to Tommy through the rearview mirror, teaching him about the history of the towns we passed and the meaning of road signs. As expected of a real estate development vice president, his knowledge of urban development was extensive. "Hey Tommy, see those tall buildings beyond the sign? That's downtown Charlotte. Dad's company is somewhere in there." "Wow! Is Dad's company in one of those tall buildings?" "Yes, it's in a 42-story skyscraper." "Maybe we should have Dad take you to his office sometime," I joined in the conversation. Outside the window, the early summer sunlight brightly illuminated the green trees. Pleasant country music played on the car radio. I occasionally noticed Michael checking his phone. Given his usual dedication to work, I assumed he was just checking on business matters even during vacation. At the time, I thought it was just routine work verification. Looking back now, I should have paid more attention to those frequent phone checks. About 2 hours after leaving Charlotte, Michael spoke up. "Let's take a break soon. There's a pilot travel center about 30 miles ahead. We can fill up on gas and grab a snack." I checked the time. It was just past 10 a.m. Given how long it had been since breakfast, I was feeling a bit hungry too. "Yes, that sounds good. Tommy, do you need to use the bathroom?" We can get something to drink too. I want to get out. I'm thirsty, Tommy's voice came from the back seat. Michael activated the turn signal and began preparing to exit the highway. With smooth handling, he headed for the exit and soon arrived at the rest area parking lot. In the relatively empty parking lot, he chose a spot somewhat distant from the building. Later I would realize this spot was in a camera blind spot. Whether this was intentional, I had no idea at the time. On the far side of the parking lot were several large trucks. Most probably belonged to drivers taking their breaks. One of them, a red and silver two-tone truck, would soon dramatically change our lives. That red and silver truck, I still remember it clearly. Michael stopped the car and unbuckled his seatbelt. I'm going to use the bathroom. You two wait in the car. I'll leave the air conditioning on since it's hot outside. Okay, be careful. I nodded at Michael's words as he opened the door and stepped out. His black business shoes crossed the parking lot's white lines as he walked toward the rest area building. I absently watched his back until it disappeared behind the automatic doors. A few minutes after he vanished from sight, Tommy called out to me in a trembling voice. His expression showed an anxiety I'd never seen before, carrying an unusual tension. What's wrong, Tommy? Tommy suddenly leaned forward and reached for my shoulder. His small fingers gripped my arm tightly. Mom, we need to run. I could feel his hand trembling slightly. That trembling transferred to my body. Instinctively, I realized something serious was happening. What you might call a mother's intuition activated all my warning systems. Why? What happened? Dad's phone. I saw the messages. Tommy's voice was hoarse, and tears glistened in his eyes. My heart began to race. My mouth suddenly felt dry. What messages? I tried to keep my voice steady, but a slight tremor still crept in. Dad and the young lady, they're planning for us to disappear. Mom, I'm scared. It took my mind a few seconds to comprehend what those words meant. However, my son's serious expression and trembling voice instantly told me this wasn't a child's made-up story. All the small oddities from before suddenly took on grave significance. The frequent phone checks, late-night work, subtly changed attitude. And choosing this particular parking spot. My hand naturally reached for my cell phone. I unlocked the screen and dialed emergency services. While various thoughts swirled in my head, maternal instinct made me act decisively. Tommy, listen to Mom carefully. Keep your seatbelt fastened tight. Instructing my son to stay in the car, I quickly stepped outside while waiting for the 911 operator to answer. Stepping into the rest area parking lot, the heat was a stark contrast to the car's interior. The reflection from the asphalt seemed to heighten the tension of the situation. I'm at the Pilot Travel Center along I-85. My son and I are in danger. At that moment, a thunderous noise pierced my ears. Behind me, there was a tremendous sound of metal crashing. When I turned around, a scream escaped my throat. That red and silver two-tone truck was ramming into our car. The impact severely deformed the vehicle body, and shattered window glass scattered across the parking lot. The scene burned into my retina as if in slow motion. Countless glittering glass shards. The deforming vehicle body. and the sight of my son who should be inside. Tommy! My scream echoed throughout the rest area. At that moment, my world completely changed. The peaceful daily life from just yesterday instantly transformed into an irretrievable nightmare. People nearby turned in surprise. Everything felt like events in a distant world, and my consciousness was filled only with thoughts of my son. The first to rush over was an employee from the Pilot Travel Center's coffee shop. The young woman in her early 20s wearing a green apron tried to grasp the situation with a pale face. She still held a paper cup of hot coffee in her hand. An ambulance. Someone call an ambulance. I instinctively started running toward the vehicle where my son was. The smell of gasoline began wafting from the deformed car body. However, people around me held me back. It's dangerous. Fuel might be leaking. There's a risk of explosion, please stay back. The voice belonged to a man in work clothes. He was calmly assessing the situation. A small crowd was already forming in the parking lot. A group of elderly tourists from a tour bus, long-distance drivers, rest area employees, and simple passers-by. I noticed someone trying to record video with their phone, but at that moment, I had no energy to care about such things. My son is in there. Help! I desperately tried to break free from the people's arms. That's when a security guard appeared and spoke to me in a calm voice. Ma'am, please stay calm. The fire department and ambulance are already on their way. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Emergency Services have been contacted. They'll arrive in just a few minutes. Until then, would you call out to your son? He'll be reassured if he can hear your voice. The security guard's calm voice helped me regain a bit of rationality. Following his instructions, I kept calling out toward the car. Tommy! Mom's right here. It's going to be okay. Help is coming soon. I thought I heard my son's faint crying from the deformed vehicle. That sound painfully tore at my heart. Praying, I kept calling my son's name over and over. About 5 minutes after the accident, the smell of leaking gasoline grew stronger. Rest area employees began standing by with fire extinguishers. The tension among the people gathered in the parking lot was palpable. That's when someone shouted, "Where's the truck driver?" Indeed, the driver's seat of the red and silver two-tone truck that caused the collision was empty. Looking around, no one resembling the driver could be seen. As an ominous atmosphere began to spread, the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance. Fire trucks and ambulances arrived at the scene one after another, and rescue teams immediately began their operations. Firefighters in orange protective gear efficiently prepared their equipment. I was explaining the sequence of events leading up to the accident to a young female police officer. She listened intently to my story while taking notes. Michael's unusual behavior, and the messages Tommy said he saw on the phone. As I explained, various doubts grew within me. Mrs. Carter, when did you last see your husband? That question startled me. Michael was nowhere to be seen. More than 20 minutes had passed since he said he was going to the bathroom. Police officers searching the building hadn't reported seeing him either. At that moment, a strong voice came from the rescue team. We've rescued the boy. He's conscious. Vitals are stable. I immediately ran to that location. I could see Tommy being placed on a yellow stretcher. The child's seat had clearly saved his life. Though he had scratches on his face and was trembling, there were no apparent major injuries. Mom. I was scared. At Tommy's weak voice, tears welled up in my eyes. A paramedic spoke to me while fitting an oxygen mask on him. We're taking him to Novant Health Presbyterian Medical Center. While it seems he's avoided serious injury, we need to do detailed examinations to be sure. We'll do CT scans and internal organ checks. I was permitted to ride in the ambulance. At that time, I caught fragments of conversation from the police officers conducting the scene investigation. The truck's license plate isn't registered. Collect witness statements about the driver. Why choose this parking spot? It's a complete blind spot. The fragments of conversation I heard carried an ominous air. At the accident scene, police forensics team members had begun taking photographs. During the roughly 20-minute ambulance ride, I held Tommy's hand continuously. The paramedics checked his vital signs, monitoring his heart rate and blood pressure on screens. As Charlotte's cityscape flowed past the windows, I desperately tried to comfort my son. "You were so brave, Tommy. Thank you for telling Mom. Because of you, we..." Tommy just nodded slightly. His eyes held a fear that no 6-year-old should experience. Occasionally, I could feel his small body trembling. The paramedic explained this might be a sign of psychological trauma. When we arrived at the hospital, the emergency room at Novant Health Presbyterian Medical Center was already prepared to receive us. A team of doctors and nurses in white coats immediately surrounded the stretcher as it was unloaded from the ambulance. 6-year-old male, vehicle accident victim, conscious, vitals stable. CT room is ready. Brief conversations were exchanged among the medical team. Tommy was taken to the examination room, and I was told to wait in the waiting area. The spacious, predominantly white waiting room already had several families sitting with serious expressions. That's when I saw Michael rushing into the hospital lobby. "Linda." His usually dashing appearance was nowhere to be seen. His suit was wrinkled, sweat beaded on his forehead, and his expression showed an anxiety I'd never seen before. However, before he could approach us, 2 police officers stepped in front of him. "Mr. Michael Carter. We have some questions for you." The young female police officer from earlier spoke in a calm voice. "Why weren't you at the scene during the accident? We checked the security camera footage, but there's no record of you entering the building." I didn't miss the slight tensing of Michael's face. His left hand was trembling slightly. His words trailed off. At that moment, a doctor in light blue scrubs appeared in the waiting room. "We have your son's test results." We all turned toward the doctor. While praying for Tommy's safety, I took a deep breath. The doctor's explanation was fortunately positive regarding physical aspects. Thanks to the properly installed child seat, Tommy's injuries were limited to mild bruising and scratches. However, the psychological shock was significant, and considering the possibility of post-traumatic stress disorder, he would need to be monitored for a while. We'll keep him hospitalized tonight to observe his condition. A child psychologist is standing by, so we can begin treatment tomorrow. As I was about to head to my son's room, the police officer addressed Michael again. Her expression had become sterner than before. "Would you cooperate with our questioning at the station? We have numerous points to confirm regarding the security camera footage and witness statements from the scene." Michael momentarily showed an expression as if he wanted to run away. However, surrounded by police officers, he had no choice but to comply. "Yes, of course, I'll cooperate." His voice held not a trace of his usual confidence. He seemed like a completely different person. There was no sign of his usual dignified demeanor anywhere. While holding Tommy's hand in the hospital room, I quietly prepared myself for the long battle that was about to begin. From the room's window, I could see Charlotte's cityscape. The early summer sunlight was piercingly bright, as if mocking our peaceful daily life from just this morning. 24 hours after the accident, on Sunday morning, I was listening to detectives' explanations in a hospital room. Outside the window, church bells rang quietly. This would have been the time we'd normally be heading to church as a family. Let me share the facts that our investigation has uncovered. Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Detective Sarah Martin opened her file with a steady voice. Next to her sat cybercrime detective Jim Collins. Both appeared to have been investigating continuously since yesterday without rest. "First, we've confirmed the mobile phone messages your son witnessed before the accident." Detective Collins's tablet displayed a complex diagram of communication records. The events at the rest area vividly came back to me. The messages Tommy saw were sent and received through an encrypted application. However, after accessing the data with a warrant, we were able to recover all exchanges from the past 2 years. While scrolling through the screen, the detective continued his explanation. "We've confirmed frequent communications with a specific number. Multiple times a day, regardless of whether it was late night or early morning. The other party is Skyline Development employee Jessica Roberts." Hearing that name, I felt my spine freeze. The young employee Michael trusted. A woman we sometimes socialized with as families. Someone who had even given Tommy a Christmas present last year. Faced with this reality, I was at a loss for words. "We've also confirmed the content of the messages," Detective Collins continued. "Particularly the exchanges from the past month serve as decisive evidence." The detective hesitated for a moment before carefully proceeding. "They were planning a new life in Miami, Florida. Everything was prepared for them to head there immediately after the accident." Detective Martin spread out new documents. The financial investigation of Skyline Development also revealed serious fraud. Following an internal whistleblower report from the accounting department, we conducted an overnight investigation. The spreadsheet screen showed complex money flows. Over the past year, approximately $3 million in funds had been diverted through multiple fictitious projects. The South Beach Resort Development Project in particular is suspicious. While it appears to be a legitimate investment on paper, the reality is completely different. Specifically, it's a luxury condominium on Miami's oceanfront. Purchase price, $2.5 million, the other detective added. It was contracted under Jessica Roberts's name, and interior work was already completed. This fraud would have certainly been discovered during next week's scheduled company audit. That pressure must have been driving them into a corner. The police investigation revealed even more shocking facts. We've also confirmed the existence of life insurance policies taken out 3 months ago. Detective Martin's voice grew more serious. Life insurance for you and your child. It was contracted as part of the company's benefits program. The insurance amount is $5 million each for both of you. The beneficiary is your husband. My hands trembled. I remembered how 2 days before the accident, Michael had brought documents, saying, "It's the company's new insurance system," and asked for my signature. I had signed without any suspicion. Analysis of the accident scene also reveals clear planning. Detective Collins switched the tablet screen. A detailed diagram of the rest area appeared. This is the parking lot surveillance camera layout. The spot where he parked was a complete blind spot. Furthermore, we've identified the truck driver, Steve Morrison. Morrison is a college friend of your husband. He was promised a $500,000 reward, as he was in financial difficulties. Detective Martin showed a new photograph. A young Michael and Steve. They were smiling with their arms around each other's shoulders, wearing football uniforms. Morrison turned himself in this morning. He said he couldn't bear the guilt. His testimony revealed the full scope of the plan. They intended to collect $10 million in insurance money and start a new life in Miami before the company audit. To achieve this, they had planned to eliminate me and Tommy. Decisive evidence was also found at Roberts's residence. Detective Collins shared the latest investigation results. Airline tickets to Miami, new passports, and a large amount of cash. All prepared yesterday evening. According to the plan, they were supposed to fly to Miami amid the confusion after the accident. However, Tommy's quick thinking exposed everything. Those words brought to mind Tommy sleeping in his hospital room. "The pure heart of my 6-year-old son had saved our lives." And on Monday morning, all their plans came to an end. At 8 a.m., the police special investigation unit arrived at the high-rise building housing Skyline development. Red and blue patrol car lights reflected off the glass entrance. Michael was arrested on the 42nd floor office, just as the first morning meeting was about to begin. Employees watched as Michael was quietly handcuffed. The once dignified vice president's presence was no longer there. At the same time, another investigation team surrounded Jessica Roberts's luxury apartment. Designer clothes were stuffed into the open closet, and airline tickets to Miami lay on the table. She submitted to arrest without resistance. Local media covered the incident extensively. The Charlotte Observer ran front-page headlines, "Skyline Development VP Planned Family Murder," and local TV station WSNC-TV produced a special program detailing the incident. $3 million company fund embezzlement discovered, escape plan with mistress, attempted murder for insurance money, 6-year-old boy's courage saves mother's life. Each headline stabbed at my heart. The most shocking evidence was found on Michael's laptop, a detailed plan. The accident location and timing, truck collision angle, security camera blind spots, alibi creation, insurance collection procedures, plans for their new life in Miami. Everything was documented with cold calculation. Digital forensic analysis allowed us to recover deleted emails and messages. Detective Collins made his final report. The planning began about 6 months ago. Their actions became increasingly desperate as the company audit approached. Skyline Development's internal investigation continued to reveal new facts. Michael and Jessica's relationship had begun 2 years ago. What started as a simple workplace relationship gradually deepened. Then the company fund misappropriation began, and everything progressed toward an irreversible direction. According to colleague testimonies, there were suspicions about their relationship within the company. However, due to the weight of the vice president position, no one dared to speak up. Your son's testimony was key to solving this case. Detective Martin stated quietly. His brave action prevented the worst outcome. Looking at Tommy sleeping in his hospital room, I heaved a deep sigh. My son's intuition and courage had saved our lives. However, it had also left deep wounds in his heart. Hours after the arrest, Steve Morrison's testimony revealed more details. He had participated in Michael's plan due to financial difficulties. The promised reward was $500,000. However, unable to bear the guilt after the accident, he decided to turn himself in. Evening News reported this incident as the failure of a perfect plan. But to me, it seemed like divine guidance, thwarted by my son's pure heart and sharp intuition. As shock waves ran through Charlotte's business community, prosecutors moved swiftly. Within a week of the incident's discovery, all 3 suspects were indicted. Michael was charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and company fund embezzlement. Jessica was charged with conspiracy and fraud, and Steve with aiding attempted murder. The incident had a significant impact on the local community. The church community extended support to us, and Tommy's elementary school began special care with staff and counselors. We feel deep sadness that such an incident occurred in our community. The principal of Providence Spring Elementary School issued a statement. However, we have also learned important lessons from the brave actions of our young student. The evening sky visible from the hospital room quietly changed colors. I closed my eyes deeply, preparing for our new life starting tomorrow. Telling myself this wasn't an end, but a new beginning. 6 months after the incident, Tommy and I are living a new life. Every morning at Lakeview Elementary School's gate where I drop him off, Tommy waves with a smile. Though there were concerns about the transfer initially, thanks to his teacher Mrs. Brown's warm consideration, he has now regained his natural smile. "Mom, I'm going to play with friends at the park today too." Those words fill me with deep relief. The twice-weekly psychological counseling is clearly showing effects. The nights haunted by nightmares are gradually decreasing. Last month, we received the final communication from Charlotte. It reported that all trials had concluded. Michael received 25 years in prison for attempted murder and insurance fraud. Jessica received 10 years as an accomplice, and Steve, who had turned himself in, received 8 years through a plea bargain. It was truly over now. In my new home study, I had resumed my graphic design work. Local clients were gradually increasing, and new relationships were being built. The church community had warmly welcomed us, mother and son. I'm so glad I listened to Tommy's words that day. When I expressed this during counseling, the doctor quietly nodded. Children's intuition can sometimes be sharper than adults. Perhaps it was the courage of a mother who believed in that intuition that opened the path to a new life. Outside the window, the blue waves of the Gulf of Mexico sparkled. The dark memories were gradually healing in this light. Mother and child, a new form of family. But our story, bound by sure ties, has only just begun. Gentle spring sunlight streamed down onto the quiet residential streets of suburban Boston. As I was planting tulip bulbs with my son Jason in front of our modern white two-story house, he suddenly spoke up. "Mom, these bulbs smell nice." I couldn't help but smile at his words. My 12-year-old son always notices these little changes. He has such keen powers of observation, surprising for a 7th grader. Watching him put what he learns in science club into practice in daily life makes me proud as a mother. You're right, they smell like spring. My name is Amy Brown. I'm 35 and work as a top sales agent at a major luxury real estate firm in town. These weekend mornings spent in our well-tended garden, my shoulder-length brown hair swaying in the breeze, are precious moments. My husband Michael is an investment banker. He's a kind and family-oriented man, distinguished by his tall frame and short black hair. I still feel proud when I see him in his suits, which suit him so well. There's just one thing that concerns me: he's a bit too indulgent with his mother, Barbara. This tendency has grown stronger since his father passed away 2 years ago. Barbara, his mother and a former pharmacist, maintains an outwardly refined demeanor, but I sense a controlling nature beneath the surface. Dressed in designer clothes and maintaining an impeccable appearance, she's been increasingly meddling in our family affairs lately. I'm particularly concerned about her relationship with Rachel, Michael's sister. Rachel, who works as a pediatrician, still lives with Barbara in their family home. Proud and deeply dependent on her mother, she maintains a delicate distance from our family. After 12 years of marriage to Michael, the peaceful atmosphere our family once enjoyed has begun to shift recently. It started when the topic of inheritance came up. While we maintain a facade of normalcy, a subtle tension has begun to permeate family relationships. "Mom, let's plant the next bulb." Jason's voice brought me back to reality. His love for science has recently turned to chemistry experiments and insect collecting, and he spends his weekends absorbed in various research projects with his experiment set. His pure spirit of inquiry has become a great source of comfort for me amidst these complex family dynamics. It was 10 a.m. on a particular Saturday. Soft spring sunlight was streaming through the large windows, bathing our modern white furniture in warm light. While enjoying a peaceful weekend moment looking through Jason's science magazine together on the living room sofa, the doorbell suddenly rang. Oh, who could that be? When I opened the door, Barbara and Rachel were standing there. Barbara was wearing a Chanel suit with an elegant pearl necklace at her throat. Her perfect makeup and luxury brand handbag exuded her usual refinement. "Good morning, Amy. We're coming in." Barbara and Rachel walked into the living room as naturally as if entering their own home. Barbara was holding an unfamiliar glass bottle. A greenish-yellow liquid inside sparkled translucently in the morning light. This is unusual, coming by without notice. Michael, who was in the living room, showed a pleased expression at his mother's sudden visit. Already in his suit, apparently planning to work on the weekend, he stood up from the sofa to greet his mother. I'm so glad everyone's here, Barbara said with a satisfied smile, carefully placing the glass bottle she'd brought on the table. I made a special health juice. I prepared it carefully this morning using expensive herbs. Rachel nodded slightly at these words. My sister-in-law was already making herself comfortable in a corner of the living room. She was dressed in perfect weekend fashion, apparently having brunch plans with friends. Oh, thank you so much. I politely responded while going to the kitchen to get glasses. I arranged 4 white porcelain glasses on a tray and returned to the living room. However, it was Jason who noticed something was wrong. Wait a minute. Jason looked up from his science magazine and began carefully observing the juice Barbara had started pouring. His serious gaze made me catch my breath for a moment. What's wrong, Jason? This smells like almonds. But there's something strange about it, Jason said, bringing his nose closer and carefully checking the scent like a scientist. We learned about this in science club last week. They said to be careful of unusually sweet smells. I don't think this is safe. The atmosphere in the room froze for a moment. How dare you be so rude as to suspect Mother? Michael's voice rang out stronger than usual. Acting so high and mighty just because you learned a little bit in science club. With that, Michael grabbed a glass and drank the juice in one gulp. His rough gesture made me involuntarily call out, Michael. In a small voice. There's no need to pay so much attention to what a child says, Rachel said, watching the situation with cold eyes. Something calculated in her expression sent a chill down my spine. Barbara sat gracefully on the sofa, merely observing the situation. However, her expression showed tension unlike her usual self. A heavy atmosphere hung in the living room, with everyone seeming to hold their breath in the silence. While sunlight streaming through the large windows remained bright as ever, the air inside felt like it was gradually changing quality. About 2 hours later, I heard Michael's distressed voice from the study where he had been preparing for work. When I rushed over, my husband was pale and covered in cold sweat. Michael, are you all right? Before he could answer, he suddenly began vomiting violently. Seeing his condition, I hurriedly called an ambulance and asked Rachel for her medical opinion. However, she coldly dismissed it, saying, "We can only wait for the ambulance," as if it were someone else's problem. The ambulance siren broke the quiet of the residential neighborhood. Neighbors anxiously peeked out from their houses and windows. Barbara muttered, "Surely not," softly, while Rachel remained silent. Amidst the chaos, Jason was desperately checking his science club notebook. As I watched the paramedics arrive and load Michael into the ambulance, my son's words kept echoing in my head. Be careful of unusually sweet smells. We should have taken that warning seriously. After the ambulance left, only an ominous atmosphere remained in front of the house. Mrs. Green from across the street stood worriedly in her garden, talking to someone on the phone. The Andersons next door huddled by their entrance, discussing something in hushed voices. The sudden attention focused on our previously peaceful home felt strangely surreal. When I returned to the living room, only a tense atmosphere remained. Barbara and Rachel had already left. They had departed saying they had plans, without even showing concern for Michael. Their hasty departure seemed odd. That's when Jason came running down from his room with his science club notebook. "Mom, look. Mr. Phillips told us last week. If there's an unnatural sweet smell, especially one that smells like almonds, we should report it to the police right away." Looking at my son's serious expression, I nodded. "Don't worry. The investigation will begin soon." Questions kept surfacing and disappearing in my mind. Why did my mother-in-law suddenly bring juice? Why did Rachel act so coldly? And most importantly, how was Michael doing now, after drinking the juice despite our son's warning? The spring sunlight streaming through the large living room window felt strangely cold, unlike before. In the waiting room at Newton Wellesley Hospital, only the sound of the clock ticked quietly. 3 hours had passed since the emergency transport, and Michael was undergoing various tests. Outside the window, the spring sun was beginning to set. A middle-aged doctor in a white coat approached with a serious expression. "The test results are in. We've detected large amounts of laxative components in your husband's system. The concentration is many times higher than normal medication levels." His words sent a chill down my spine. I unconsciously squeezed Jason's hand tightly as he gasped beside me. "He's currently experiencing severe dehydration. We've started 4 fluids immediately, but he'll need to be hospitalized for at least a week." While the doctor continued his explanation, 2 detectives were carefully handling the juice bottle collected as evidence across the waiting room. The greenish liquid sealed in a clear evidence bag cast an eerie glow under the fluorescent lights. "Ma'am, could we ask you a few more detailed questions?" An older female detective approached me speaking quietly. Still holding Jason's hand, I gave a small nod. "This juice was made by your mother-in-law, correct?" "Yes. She came by suddenly around 10 a.m. The questioning continued for about 30 minutes. I explained the morning's events as calmly as possible, in chronological order: my son's suspicions, my husband's reaction, and the circumstances leading to the emergency transport. For a former pharmacist to accidentally use such a concentration of laxatives. The young male detective's muttered words while tilting his head weighed heavily on my chest. By evening, Barbara had been called in by the police. When we passed her in the hospital hallway, she was terribly distraught, unlike her usual elegant demeanor. I didn't. As Barbara stumbled over her words, I felt complex emotions. But just then, my husband's angry shout from his hospital room startled us. "What are you planning to do with Mother?" Michael was confronting the police officer while still attached to his fore. Though his face was still pale, his eyes burned with anger. "Mother would never do such a thing." "Amy, are you suspecting Mother too?" At those words, I momentarily lost my voice. Glancing to the side, I saw Jason watching his father with an anxious expression. "Michael, calm down. What's important now is to confirm the facts." "Facts? You're treating Mother like a criminal based on our son's nonsense." At my husband's words, Jason's shoulders trembled slightly. "Dear, Jason was just worried." "Shut up." I quietly left the hospital room while holding my son's shoulders. Through the hallway window, I could see the twilight sky. The police investigation continued. Barbara was questioned about her knowledge as a pharmacist and made to explain in detail how she made the juice. Security camera footage, records of ingredient purchases, and various suspicious points kept emerging. Rachel arrived at the hospital after dark. However, instead of heading to Michael's room, she quickly made her way to where her mother was being questioned by police. That night, I decided to stay at a hotel near the hospital with Jason. The atmosphere at home was too heavy to return there. "Mom, doesn't Dad believe what I said?" Jason asked in a small voice as he lay in bed. "You did the right thing. You identified the danger based on scientific observation. That was a very wise judgment." While gently stroking my son's head, I continued as if trying to convince myself. "But Dad wants to believe in Grandma. It's very painful to doubt someone you love. But the scientific evidence." Jason opened his science club notebook, staring at the page about the relationship between almond scents and dangerous substances. Looking at his serious profile, I felt my chest tighten. Outside the window, the hospital lights floated in the night sky. In this one day, our family's way of being had changed dramatically. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still hidden behind these events. "We'll get to the bottom of this." While gently rubbing Jason's back as he tried to fall asleep, I made a firm resolution. Both my son's scientific observation and my maternal instinct pointed to darkness lurking behind this incident. In the midnight quiet of the hotel, I was reflecting on the day's events. The details revealed during the police investigation came back to me one after another, like scenes from a movie. The investigators were particularly focused on how the juice was made. According to Barbara's testimony, she had started early in the morning to brew herbs and make a health drink following a special recipe. However, when police checked the kitchen, they found neither herb remnants nor any evidence of brewing. The hospital test results were also concerning. According to the doctor, the type of laxative detected was a special medical grade not available in regular pharmacies. Moreover, the dosage was dangerously excessive. Several times the normal therapeutic dose was detected in Michael's system. Even more worrying was Rachel's unnatural behavior. Despite being a doctor, she never came to check on her brother's condition. Rather, she seemed fixated on accompanying her mother during questioning. Her behavior seemed somehow calculated. While watching Jason's sleeping face on the bed, I made a vow in my heart. Whatever the truth behind this incident might be, I would prove that my son's courageous action wasn't wrong. The next morning, I headed to the hospital to bring my husband a change of clothes. The hallways of Newton Wellesley were bustling with doctors and nurses who had finished their morning rounds. On my way to Michael's room, I passed by Rachel's office. She works as a pediatrician in a different wing of this hospital. The office was empty, perhaps because she was doing rounds. The door was half open, allowing a glimpse inside. That's when I noticed papers scattered on the floor. Normally I wouldn't have paid attention, but after everything that had happened, my senses were heightened. I stepped into the quiet office where no one called out. As I bent to pick up the fallen papers, I noticed something strange in the trash can. Empty medicine boxes. Specifically, boxes of the same medical-grade laxative, carelessly thrown away. Next to them, a handwritten memo with Barbara's signature practiced multiple times. And among a bundle of receipts, one showing the purchase of almond essence. The date was the day before the incident. I quickly contacted the police. This needed to be preserved as evidence. The investigation progressed rapidly. Security cameras had captured Rachel entering Barbara's house the night before the incident. And 30 minutes later, her image leaving with that glass bottle. Rachel's computer history revealed visits to legal websites about inheritance division, medical papers about laxative side effects, and searches for Barbara's pharmacist license number. All the pieces started falling into place. A $5 million inheritance dispute. Initially, the distribution was set at $3.5 million for Michael and his wife, and $1.5 million for Rachel. The reason was that Michael had promised to take care of their parents in their old age. However, this deeply wounded Rachel's pride. Why should she, a successful doctor, receive less than her brother? This dissatisfaction grew within her day by day. "I'll tell you everything." In the interrogation room, Rachel finally opened up. Her confession revealed the full scope of the plan. Rachel had always wanted to monopolize her mother's affection since childhood. After her brother's marriage, she harbored growing jealousy toward me. Her attachment to living with her mother was abnormally strong, intertwined complexly with her pride as a doctor and strong desire for financial independence. She thought she had planned everything perfectly. Using her hospital position to obtain medical-grade laxatives, she studied her mother's pharmaceutical knowledge to make it look suspicious. She even perfectly copied her mother's health juice recipe. The day before the incident, she snuck into her mother's house while she was out and checked the juice ingredients. She mixed laxatives into juice made with the same ingredients, preparing her mother's special bottles and containers. On the day of the incident, she switched it with her mother's original juice and disposed of all evidence. She tried to mask the drug's smell with almond essence, but that backfired. The plan's objectives were clear. Distance her brother's family from their mother, maintain her two-person lifestyle with her mother. Attempt to renegotiate the inheritance distribution, and make me suspect my mother-in-law to create a decisive rift in the family. However, Rachel's plan had fatal miscalculations. Jason's sharp scientific knowledge. The almond scent actually highlighting the unnaturalness. And her own unnatural behavior at the hospital arousing suspicion. I always knew. Barbara's confession froze everyone. The mother had vaguely noticed her daughter's abnormal attachment but avoided confronting it. The guilt of continuing to turn a blind eye and her anguish as a mother cast deep shadows on her expression. In the hospital hallway where the truth was revealed, each family member's emotions exploded. Why would you do this?" Michael's angry voice echoed. "I just wanted Mother too." Rachel had lost control of her emotions. While Barbara shed tears of regret, Rachel had completely lost her emotional control. You understand, don't you? You get to be near mother, inherit the family business, build a happy family. What about me? I became a doctor, gained independence, and yet I only get 30% of the inheritance. Rachel's screams echoed through the hospital hallway. It was an outpouring of childhood jealousy and attachment, and twisted love. I have the right to be with mother too. But you take everything. Mother's attention, the inheritance, everything. At that moment, Michael's hand struck Rachel's cheek. Silence. With the sharp sound echoing in the hallway, time seemed to stand still. You tried to kill me using mother's name. And then tried to frame mother for it. I'll never forgive you, never. Michael's voice was trembling. It was filled not so much with anger as with deep sorrow. The sense of loss as trust in his sister, family bonds, all crumbled in an instant, was evident in his voice. Jason watched this scene from a distance, dumbfounded. He probably never imagined that the abnormality he discovered through scientific observation would lead to such a family breakdown. What I said was actually true. His mumbling contained the bewilderment of someone who had stumbled upon a truth they wished they hadn't known. Sometimes, young scientists discover cruel realities. That weight bore heavily on the 12-year-old boy's shoulders. With a deep sigh, Barbara approached Rachel. I need to apologize too. While I noticed your feelings, I kept pretending not to see. That led to this situation. Deep shadows of maternal anguish and regret fell across Barbara's face. She had continued to avoid confronting her daughter's abnormal attachment despite being aware of it. That guilt wasn't something that could be easily erased. I tried to view this seemingly irreparable family rift with calm eyes. However, various emotions were swirling inside me: love for my husband, pride in my son's courage, sympathy for my mother-in-law, and complex feelings toward my sister-in-law. Outside the window, the spring sun shone mercilessly. The beautiful weather seemed to highlight the gravity of the situation. We can never return to those peaceful days of the past. Finding a way forward as a family from here wouldn't be easy. Rachel was taken away by the police, and Michael returned to his room. Barbara remained seated, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Taking Jason's hand, I quietly left the scene. The spring sunlight remained bright and cruelly dazzling. A year has passed since then. Outside the window, cherry blossoms are beginning to bloom again. We were holding our monthly family meeting around the living room table. Rachel was charged with assault and attempted murder, and at trial, she was severely judged for attempting to administer dangerous drugs by exploiting her position as a doctor. As a result, she received a 5-year prison sentence. However, considering her potential for rehabilitation, she was assigned to serve her time in a rehabilitation facility where she could receive specialized care. How does everyone's schedule look for this month's family counseling? In response to my question, Michael nodded while checking his planner. Since the trial ended, our family has been receiving regular counseling. Though my husband was initially reluctant, he now actively adjusts his schedule for it. "I can make it after the club activities," Jason answered while showing his science club schedule. At the trial, his scientific observation skills were praised for contributing significantly to uncovering the truth. That experience deepened his interest in science even further, and now he's a key figure in the school's science fair. Barbara testified as a witness at the trial, acknowledging her mistake in not properly addressing her daughter's abnormal attachment despite being aware of it. After the incident, she sold her large house and moved to a small apartment. Now she's involved in community volunteer work, particularly focusing on supporting single-parent families. Every Saturday afternoon, she spends time with our family. This was her own strong wish. Another letter came from Rachel. Barbara announced quietly. Life in the rehabilitation facility isn't easy. However, she seems to be starting to face her actions while receiving professional care. Through counseling, she's beginning to understand how distorted her attachment to her mother and jealousy toward her brother's family had become. What does it really mean to have family bonds? Michael muttered one day. The incident and trial taught all of us important lessons, that blood ties alone don't make a family, the importance of having the courage to see the truth, and above all, the difficulty and preciousness of rebuilding broken trust. I feel I've become stronger now than before. My husband has become more conscious of maintaining appropriate family boundaries, and my son is growing into a budding scientist who values his intuition. Barbara is now walking a new path in life while confronting her past weaknesses. Rachel, too, is steadily progressing on her path to rehabilitation. We're quietly but hopefully watching over her recovery. Let's take another new step forward together. The spring light streaming through the window was bright, just like that day, but different now. It felt as though it was gently illuminating our family's future. Around 9 o'clock, when the hour hand pointed to 9, I heard that sound again. The faint sound of the upstairs bathroom door closing. I looked up from the papers in front of me and gazed at the ceiling. The wooden floors in this house, built in the 1980s, creaked slightly whenever someone walked across them. Those sounds let me track my daughter's movements. Emma's small footsteps heading toward the bathroom. "Emma." As I called out while climbing the stairs, my 10-year-old daughter gave her usual response. The same conversation that had been repeating at this time recently. "Yes, Mom. I'll be out soon." There was something in her voice, a kind of urgency, a hint of hurry. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door. Early September nights in Minnesota were already beginning to feel chilly. I could feel the cool breeze coming through the bathroom window. The light from the bathroom, located next to the master bedroom, cast a thin strip of light into the hallway. Lately, I'd been concerned about Emma's habit. Every night around 9, she'd go into the bathroom and stay there for a long time. She wasn't showering or brushing her teeth. There was hardly any sound of running water. Only signs that she was doing something leaked into the hallway. The sound of drawers opening, something being set down, and occasionally, a stifled sigh. "Emma, are you really okay?" I approached the door again and called out. After a slight pause, she answered my worried mother's voice. I'm fine, Mom. Just a little longer. The words were the same as always. But there was something in her voice that suggested she was hiding something. A mother's intuition told me something wasn't right. Whatever was happening behind that door was more than just nighttime preparations. I returned to the living room downstairs and looked out the window. It was almost time for my husband Thomas to come home. He worked as a middle manager at Coldwell Banker, a real estate development company, commuting on Interstate 35W. Recently, he'd been coming home later, perhaps due to work stress. And when he did come home, there was a slight smell of alcohol. He'd be irritable, not wanting to talk to anyone. I checked my phone screen. 9:15, it had been 20 minutes since Emma went into the bathroom. The cleanup from dinner bought at Whole Foods was finished, and normally we'd be watching TV together as a family. But lately, at this time, Emma would always disappear into the bathroom. What reason would a normal 10-year-old girl have to spend so much time in there? No sound of a shower, no sound of running water at the sink. Just occasional small noises of something being moved around. I hadn't paid much attention to it before. I thought it was just a small change in my growing daughter. She was in 4th grade at Pleasant View Elementary School, an age when physical changes begin. But over the past week, the sense that something was wrong had grown stronger. I felt like Emma's behavior was gradually changing. When she comes home from school, she goes straight to her room. She used to happily tell me about what happened at school. During dinner, she doesn't talk as much as before. And without fail, at 9 o'clock, she heads to the bathroom. Around the time Thomas is due home. As if she's trying to escape from something, or hide something. The street lights outside cast their cold autumn light. Emma, having finished her homework, would normally be reading Harry Potter at this time. An open book lay on her desk. But now, something I didn't know about was happening behind that closed door. I climbed the stairs again and stood in front of the bathroom door. From inside came sounds like something being wrapped, like fabric being handled. Perhaps folding towels. My reflection in the foggy mirror looked anxious. Emma, it's bedtime. 5 more minutes. A hurried voice replies. That voice lacks its usual brightness. There's a sense of urgency in it, as if being chased by something. Like she's racing against time. I reached out and touched the doorknob. But I couldn't turn it. It was locked from the inside. As a mother, it wouldn't be appropriate to try opening the door while Emma was bathing. But this wasn't bathing. There was no sound of water, no sign of a shower. Just the faint sound of someone desperately doing something. The shadows of street trees created moving patterns on the hallway walls. The scent of coffee bought from Caribou Coffee that afternoon still lingered in the house. Everything looked like a normal weeknight. But in this quietness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something serious was lurking. A mother's sixth sense sending out warnings. Car headlights illuminated the window. It was about time for Thomas to come home. Emma quickly opened the door and came out into the hallway in her pajamas. Her hair was still dry. She hurried toward her room with her head down. She looked like she was running from something. "Good night, Mom." Her voice was small and seemed to tremble. The sound of her door closing seemed to announce that once again, something was being hidden tonight. The darkness of night enveloping that secret. I entered the bathroom. There was little sign it had been used. The towels were still folded. The bathtub was dry. Only the first aid kit under the sink seemed slightly out of place. On the floor, a single piece of used cotton wool had been left behind, as if overlooked. The next morning, Emma insisted on wearing a long-sleeved hoodie to school, even though it was still hot despite being September. "Aren't you hot?" When I asked, Emma shook her head. "I'm cold." "This is fine." There was something defensive in her gesture. Arms crossed in front of her chest, body curled in on itself. The thought grew stronger in my mind that last night's long time in the bathroom had something to do with this morning's behavior. At breakfast, Emma barely ate, tearing her toast into tiny pieces. She didn't touch the scrambled eggs she usually likes. Instead, she kept fidgeting with the ends of her long sleeves. "Is school fun?" "Yes." After the short reply, silence followed again. I couldn't get the detailed stories I used to hear anymore. Events with friends, discoveries in class, everything was locked away in short words. As I watched Emma's retreating figure after sending her off, I remembered the piece of cotton wool I'd found last night. Why did she need the first aid kit? Why did she need to stay in the bathroom? And why did it coincide with her father's return time? In the afternoon, when I returned early from my part-time job, Thomas's jacket was thrown over the living room furniture. This was a time when he should normally be at work. "Are you feeling unwell?" My husband, coming down from upstairs, gave off the smell of alcohol in the middle of the day. The guys at work can't do anything right. They didn't follow my instructions, so everything has to be redone. Thomas snapped while looking at his phone, clearly irritated. His bad moods had been getting worse lately. He said work at Coldwell Banker had gotten busier. But was this just work stress? "Aren't you worried about Emma?" I carefully asked. "What about her? She seems normal." Thomas answered dismissively, reaching for the whiskey bottle. At 3 in the afternoon. In the evening, Emma didn't come home at her usual time after school. When I called, worried, she said she was doing homework at the library. She used to always let me know about such things before. When Emma did come home, she rushed to the bathroom again. Earlier than usual. Perhaps because she knew Thomas was home. From behind the closed door came the same sounds as last night. The sound of opening the first aid kit. The sound of wrapping bandages. And occasionally, small sighs escaping. I made up my mind. I couldn't keep living in fear with just my imagination. I needed to know the truth. I ordered a small camera online, and it arrived by express delivery the next morning. During the brief time when Emma was at school and Thomas was at work, my hands were shaking. I installed the small camera next to the bathroom exhaust fan, carefully adjusting the angle so no one would notice. My heart was torn with conflict about whether this was the right choice, whether I was violating my daughter's privacy. But I couldn't sleep like this anymore. That evening, as soon as Emma came home from school, she changed into long sleeves again. The September weather was still hot, even with the air conditioning turned down. There was a desperation in her movements to hide something. pulling at her sleeves, checking her collar, withdrawing her body to avoid being touched. During dinner, I noticed Emma's hands trembling under the table. It happened right after Thomas sent a message about his arrival time. My stomach hurts. Saying that, Emma left the table and disappeared into the upstairs bathroom again. 9 o'clock again tonight. The same time again tonight. But tonight, I would know the truth. The small camera was recording everything. Downstairs, I stared at my smartphone screen. The reason for Emma's changes would soon be revealed there. My finger trembled slightly as it touched the play button, mixed feelings of fear and determination. The images that appeared on my smartphone screen made my worst fears real. As the clock struck 9, like a heartbeat, my daughter's figure appeared on screen. Under the bathroom's fluorescent light, Emma. She slowly took off her hoodie and rolled up her long-sleeved shirt. Her movements contained slight trembles of enduring pain. In the mirror, her arms showed multiple bruises. Blue discolored marks, brown old scars. From elbow to shoulder, the scars formed irregular patterns. New injuries layered over old scars, and new injuries over those. Layered like marking the passage of time. I almost stopped breathing. No sound would come from my throat. But this was just the beginning. Emma carefully unbuttoned her shirt. There was a terrifying familiarity to her movements. Like a ritual performed every night, mechanical and precise movements. With each button undone, new scars were revealed. When the shirt fell, the full extent of the scars on her back was revealed. Red stripes like belt marks. Blue-black bruises like grab marks. Near her shoulder blades, marks that looked like she had been forcefully held down. My hands shook, nearly dropping the smartphone. The screen shook, losing focus for a moment. Though I wanted to look away, I couldn't turn my eyes from the reality my daughter had been enduring alone. This video showed the reality Emma had been carrying alone every night. Emma's small hands reached for the first aid kit under the sink. With practiced movements, she took out antiseptic and cotton wool, applying them to new injuries. While grimacing in pain, she bit her lips desperately to avoid making a sound. Biting so hard it left teeth marks. Her movements in wrapping bandages were also practiced. Not too tight, but secure enough to keep the wounds from shifting. So this was the ritual at 9 every night. A time to treat wounds alone, without being noticed by anyone, without being able to ask anyone for help. Every time the antiseptic stung her wounds, Emma's shoulders would shake slightly. But she made no sound. As if she had learned over a long time how to endure pain. The expression reflected in the mirror bore something too heavy for a 10-year-old child to carry. Days spent unable to ask anyone for help, only able to keep hiding the injuries. Time spent silently enduring, frightened by threats that the family would fall apart. As the bathroom exhaust fan continued to spin quietly, Emma continued her treatment silently. Occasionally startling at the sound of my footsteps in the hallway. Perhaps even at this moment, I had been walking the hallway pretending not to notice. In the video, after finishing wrapping new bandages, Emma carefully put her shirt back on. Hiding arm injuries with long sleeves, covering neck bruises with a high collar, sealing everything away where it couldn't be seen. Each movement like putting on armor. Like preparing for tomorrow's battlefield. And finally, carefully hiding the used cotton wool pieces in the trash can so no one would notice. Covering them with other garbage, leaving no trace. The piece of cotton wool I found last night was a trace of this ritual. It should have been a sign I shouldn't have overlooked. The video continues. Emma makes a final check of her appearance in the mirror. Are all injuries hidden? Are there any wrinkles in her clothes? Are there any traces of crying? Like going through a checklist, mechanical movements. Checking the circles under her eyes, making sure her cheeks look normal, adjusting her hair to hide neck injuries at the right angle. Then, a deep sigh. An exhausted sigh from such a small body, too mature for her age. Emma. I whispered to my daughter in the screen with a trembling voice. Even though she was right there, even at this moment while this video was being recorded, she might be repeating the same thing in the upstairs bathroom, but I hadn't noticed. I couldn't protect her. As a mother, I had failed in my most basic duty. The decision was instant. I put down the smartphone and called the police. My hand shakes as I pick up the receiver. My fingers shake as I dial the numbers. But I can't wait any longer. I need to end this situation as quickly as possible, even by a minute or a second. I'm reporting domestic violence. My 10-year-old daughter. My voice catches. My throat is dry. But this is no time for crying. The police promised to send a specialized team immediately. Until then, I must protect Emma. I go upstairs and knock on the bathroom door. The wooden door trembles slightly under my fist. Emma, open up. I hear movement from inside. Hurried sounds. The sound of hiding bandages, or perhaps destroying evidence. Wait a minute. Her voice has a different kind of urgency than usual, mixed with hurry. Open it now. Please. Perhaps sensing something in my tone, Emma slowly opened the door. Eyes still downcast. Long eyelashes trembling. It's okay now. Just as I was about to embrace her, Thomas's car made the sound of arrival. The usual sound of tires on gravel. But tonight, even that sound seems ominous. The sound of the front door opening. Heavy footsteps. Then my husband's voice. There are police outside. What happened? His voice lacks its usual intimidating tone. Instead, there's a hint of panic, like someone cornered. Emma's body stiffens at the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. I held my daughter tightly. Never again would I let anyone hurt this child. The sound of police officers entering through the front door. The rustle of uniforms. The quiet static of radios. Then Thomas's voice is heard. What's all this about? The smell of alcohol comes up the stairs. We received a report from your wife. At the police officer's calm voice, the blood drains from Thomas's face. His expression, illuminated by the hallway light, showed resignation that he could no longer hide everything. In my arms holding my daughter, Emma's small body trembles. Can you explain about the injuries on Emma's body? The quiet voice of the female officer from the specialized team reaches the bathroom. Thomas's face turns pale. All truth was etched in that expression. No more excuses, no more denials, a moment when nothing else matters. Still holding my daughter, I firmly vowed in my heart to take the first step toward a new life that was about to begin. Never again would I let anyone hurt this child. This resolve was the only truth we needed right now. The time of healing wounds alone in the midnight bathroom was over. The sound of handcuffs announced the end of a long nightmare. The cold metal sound cuts through the silence of the autumn night. Thomas Brown, you are under arrest on suspicion of child abuse. As the officer's voice echoed in the entryway, I held Emma tightly. My daughter's small body was still trembling slightly. But I could feel those trembles gradually subsiding. From this moment, everything would change. Why didn't you tell me? While holding Emma, I quietly asked. The sound of police sirens fading into the distance. The patrol car carrying my husband slowly disappearing into the darkness of the residential area. What remained was deep silence and the sense of a new beginning. Dad said. Emma continued in a small voice, face buried in my chest. That the family would fall apart. That Mom would be sad. That everyone would become unhappy because of me. He told me that every day. The tears won't stop. Even though she was so close, I couldn't notice my daughter's suffering. The time she spent alone healing wounds in the bathroom every night. Days spent enduring without being able to ask anyone for help. Too heavy a secret to bear on the shoulders of a fourth-grade elementary school student. The Child Protective Services representative spoke to us gently, along with a female counselor who rushed over despite the late hour. That gentle voice gradually thawed the frozen atmosphere. When did your father's behavior start to change? Emma thought for a moment in my arms, her small fingers still clutching my sweater tightly. There was a big failure at Dad's company. After that, he started drinking more. At first, he just yelled. But gradually, her words trail off. I gently stroked my daughter's hair. Dad cried, saying he couldn't control his anger. Emma continued. But the next day, those words revealed the habitual nature of the violence. Work stress and alcohol. These triggered him to raise his hand against his beloved daughter. Then regret and apologies, but the same thing would repeat. This negative cycle had been continuing within our family. The investigation results became clear. Thomas would hit his daughter in drunken rage, then regret it the next morning. But he would repeat the same thing again. Unable to control his emotions, he continued to hurt the one he should have protected most. The chain of alcohol dependence and violence had eaten away at his heart too. Didn't the teachers at school notice? When I worried about PE classes at Pleasant View Elementary, Emma shook her head. That gesture showed the sad wisdom of a child who had kept secrets for a long time. I changed clothes last, after everyone was gone. For swimming classes, I said my stomach hurt and stayed home. It pained my heart that a 10-year-old girl had to live so cautiously. Having to think about hiding injuries constantly, whether at school, at friends' houses, or anywhere else. The police took evidence photos and created medical records. All of Emma's injuries were documented. Each time the doctor's expression grew stern, my regret deepened. Bruises on her arms, wounds on her back, shoulder contusions. Each one told the story of what my daughter had endured. Ma'am, this isn't anyone's fault. The Child Protective Services representative said, seeing my expression. What matters is that you noticed and took action. This is just the beginning. Your new life with Emma starts now. Those words helped release some of the tension from my shoulders. As the deep night gave way to dawn, we were heading to a temporary shelter. In the old car, the warm air from the heater envelopes us. A new life begins. Mom. Emma whispered softly in the car. The street lights gently illuminated her profile. What is it? I don't have to hide in the bathroom anymore. I nodded firmly at that question, pushing back the lump in my throat. You're safe now. You don't need to hide anymore. From now on, no matter what happens, Mom will be with you. I promise. Relief appeared in Emma's eyes for the first time in a long while. Still small and fragile hope. But definitely a light that was there. I could feel her long-closed heart slowly beginning to open. When we arrived at the shelter, a specialist counselor was waiting for us. Staff members welcomed us with warm smiles. We would start our new life here until Thomas's trial began. Time for Emma's emotional wounds to heal, for me to recover as a mother. And most importantly, days to rebuild our mutual trust. Tomorrow, a new morning begins, doesn't it? Emma whispered toward the dawn sky visible from the facility's window. There was no more fear in that voice. Instead, what was there was small but certain hope. As I gently stroked my daughter's hair, I contemplated the path ahead of us. It would still take a long time for the wounds to completely heal. But she no longer needed to endure alone. Together, we would walk forward one step at a time. A new story of mother and daughter begins here. Mom, thank you. I couldn't answer Emma's words. I could only hold her tightly. Warm tears rolled down my cheeks. This is our new beginning. Never again would I let my daughter be hurt. With that vow, the sun rose. 6 months have passed since then. Mom, look. I can see Emma playing with new friends in the Pleasant View Elementary schoolyard. The frightened expression from before is gone. The scars visible on her arms from her rolled-up short sleeves are gradually fading. We started living in a new apartment. Thomas's trial concluded 3 months ago, resulting in a 4-year prison sentence. During the trial, he acknowledged his crimes while crying, promising to participate in an alcohol dependency treatment program. At first, Emma would cower just hearing her father's name. But as she continued twice-weekly counseling sessions, she gradually became able to put her feelings into words. It wasn't Dad's fault. He was sick, wasn't he? It took a lot of time before she could say that. I too continued to face my own guilt as a mother. Why couldn't I notice earlier? But the counselor's words supported me. Moving forward is the best choice you both can make right now. I found a new job too. Though the salary is less than before, they allow me to work hours that match Emma's school schedule. Every day, we cook dinner together and talk about what happened that day. I've learned deeply how precious these ordinary moments are. Thomas sends letters monthly, written as part of his rehabilitation program. He writes about his struggle with alcohol addiction, regret for his actions, and apologies to us. Emma isn't ready to read those letters yet, but perhaps someday she'll be able to forgive her father. That's a path she must choose for herself. We'll quietly wait for that time. Hey, Mom. Emma holds my hand on our way home from school today too. Will you come to the class observation day next week? That casual question brings tears to my eyes. My daughter, who once feared observation days. Now she wants to show me her proud presentation. Of course I will. I squeeze her hand back firmly. Our new life has only just begun. But we're moving forward, one step at a time, steadily. The bathroom door will never be closed in fear again.